I was born at home at 8:20 a.m. on June the 26th, 1972. As my mum would always say, I came just in time for the cornflakes. The third oldest of 7 children, and the oldest son, I weighed well over 9 pounds and had a mop of black hair on my head and all down my back. My earliest memories include my dad driving me home from one of my many appointments at the dentist, and me pretending not to be able to speak. I was only 4 years old, but managed to write "toy shop" on a piece of paper. He took me straight there, and as he asked me which toy I wanted to select as a prize for going to the dentist, I suddenly found my voice again and chose a plastic sword. That very same afternoon I began to dig a hole to Australia in our front garden. I knew that once I got there, I'd be able to fight the various creatures and barbarians that I would discover with my new sword. It turned out to be hot and tiring work, digging this hole. So after progressing about half a metre, I decided my time could be better used. Evidently, Australia wasn't ready for me yet. We lived in a beautiful thatched cottage in the sleepy village of Padbury in Buckinghamshire, with a lovely garden. The ideal place for my older sister Jenny and I to play in the long hot summers. We renamed ourselves for our games. She was Jimbo. I was Timbo. And when my younger sister Rebecca was old enough to join our merry club, she was duly named Bimbo. We had a few goats, and I was the proud owner of a goose, which I named Deedenseer, and a chicken called Yufta. Maybe in revenge for me bestowing such a name on him, Deedenseer was immortalized in tales of our family history, as on one occasion, as I enjoyed the sun, he decided to take a peck at me where no goose should ever peck. Thankfully, geese don't have teeth. My dad was an older man, 30 years older than my mum, in fact, and was organist at the village church. Sometimes I would go and sit beside him as he played at services. The Saxon-era church was like another world. Dark wooden pews, cold stone walls and pillars adorned with frayed and tattered World War I banners. But it was my dad's world, and I enjoyed sitting by him as he played, accompanied also by my Ladybird book on castles or prehistoric man. I watched Dad intently as he selected from our Scrabble game the letters for Chicheley Cottage, glued them to a board, then fixed it to our front gate as our house sign. I watched him fix a puncture on a bike. I watched him fix the lawnmower. I watched him fix the car, or at least try to. Occasionally we'd all pile into the car and go to visit another goat farmer in a nearby village. I would get frustrated that we'd stay so long because it meant I'd miss my favourite programme on TV. I didn't know that my mum was having an affair with the goat farmer. I don't remember her moving out to live with him and taking all my siblings with her. I just remember one day my dad taking me to the village shop in the car and buying me a pack of crisps and a drink in a special squeeze bottle. He then sat me on the kitchen bench and I watched him as he changed the locks on the front door. Years later I found out she'd been planning to take me away from him too. One night, aged about 4, I had a dream. It was vivid and I still remember it as if I'd had it last night. In the dream we were all sat round the kitchen table, and for some kind of infraction my mum sent me away to sit alone on the bottom step, as sometimes happened in real life. I waited there for hours, and when no one called me back, I went to the kitchen and found the whole family had disappeared. I was frightened, so I went upstairs. At the top of the stairs was a fairy. She seemed like she might be kindly, but I couldn't be sure. So I went back downstairs to go out of the house. But as I looked out of the window, a Saracen warrior, dressed in black with a curved sword, was stood in the garden facing the house. I knew he was bad. So, trapped between the good that I couldn't fully trust in and the evil that lurked outside. I felt alone and abandoned. Back to real life. One afternoon in 1978, when I was 5, I was playing with my toy soldiers at home. A neighbour came in and asked if I wanted to go with my dad to watch him play the organ. I said, "Not today. I'd rather go and play toy soldiers with my friend." When I got home later, Dad wasn't there. My older sisters had shown up and they looked worried. Then my mum came in the front door, followed by the goat farmer. She said, "Your dad has died." My sisters ran into her arms in floods of tears. Someone gave me a cup of coffee, and as I stood there, one solitary tear left my eye and dropped into the drink. The very same day, I was taken to live with my siblings, my mum, and our new stepfather, the goat farmer, who had now left his wife. It was hard to get to sleep that night. Someone was playing a record downstairs. It was Boney M's Waters of Babylon. By the waters of Babylon where we sat down, there we wept, when we remembered Zion. I looked at the ceiling and missed my dad. I felt numb. We went to see his body before he was cremated. I had a little look and felt numb. Then he was buried in a little wooden box in the churchyard. I had another dream. This time I was in heaven looking for my dad. But heaven was nothing more than a storeroom, with row upon row of library shelves holding little wooden boxes containing the remains of people. I looked for my dad, but I couldn't find him. Violence soon became an almost daily diet in our new family, both emotional and physical. I'm a musical person, and one afternoon I started playing around on the low notes of our piano, just having fun seeing what kind of sounds they make in combination. The goat farmer came in and hissed at me, "You do not play the piano that way." He took me and beat my hand hard with a thick rubber cane encased in leather. I didn't make that mistake again. I'm also a lover of language. How else could I have named a goose Diedenseer? One evening, at the dinner table, I was telling my mum and the goat farmer what I'd learnt in French that day. According to them, I pronounced the word I incorrectly. Yes, you got it, the word I. They coldly ordered me into the kitchen. They shut the door, and there they both whipped me mercilessly with a leather dog lead. Back at the table, they told me to pronounce the word correctly now. I couldn't bring myself to risk saying I again. I became we. I was 7 years old, and I was learning to take care of myself. All this took place within a good Anglican family. Every Sunday we were in church, and amidst the smiles and the platitudes, no outsider had a clue what was really going on. Those that caught glimpses quickly turned a blind eye. I knew some kind of God existed, and I believed that he was love, but I had no idea what love or God really meant. One day, aged 8, I was pushing a wheelbarrow of manure up a hill on our small farm. I was exhausted, but it was a job my mum and the goat farmer had given me to do, so I dared not stop for fear of the punishment that would come my way from them if I did. I paused for a moment, put the wheelbarrow down, and rage poured out of my heart. I literally shook my fist at the sky. God, I hate you. I hate you with everything in me, with every fiber of my being, I spat out. I can't repeat the actual words I used. I felt confused and abandoned. God is powerful, so why wasn't he helping us? Why was life so bad? Maybe he couldn't help, or more likely, he just didn't really care. I felt trapped, alone, and abandoned. I've always been a thinker, and I found it quite easy to do well academically at school. Teachers told my mum that the school system would find it hard to stretch me. So although we had no money, Mum set her sights on getting me into a private school. One afternoon, as I practiced piano, she came in and informed me I would be taking voice trials. I soon found out what that meant. I would travel to St. Paul's Cathedral in London and 2 other cathedrals and sing a song for a group of men who would decide if my voice was something they would want in their choir. If I won a place, I would be given a scholarship which would pay a large proportion of the school fees. St. Paul's were content to do without me, but both the other cathedrals offered me a place. I was given the choice of which to accept. It was a hard decision to make. As a 7-year-old boy, I was to be uprooted from family life as choir boys had to live at school. Both cities were hundreds of miles away from our home. All I knew was I would end up a long way from home in an unfamiliar place. A family friend was a priest at one of the cathedrals, so though I didn't know him, I opted to go to that one. At least there was some sort of a connection with what I was familiar with. And indeed, this new environment I stepped into at age 8 was most unfamiliar. On my first evening, once my mum and the goat farmer had left me with my boxes and bags in the school entrance, I made my way down the corridor to the school gym. I was greeted there by a huge, organised fight, or scrap as it was properly known. Apparently, this was what choir boys did for fun on Sunday evenings. There was no terrible malice in it, it was just an expression of the rough and tumble of boarding school life. Before long, I fitted right in. We slept in dormitories of about 8 or 9 boys, and an older boy was assigned to each dormitory, as the dormitory monitor. It was his job to mete out punishment to anyone who, for example, talked after lights out. My bed was positioned near the door, and I soon learnt to spot the dormitory monitor's slippered foot poking out around the corner as he stood, silently listening for any breach of the rules. I had a fascination with the supernatural, and since ghost stories are no fun to tell with the lights on, I had to breach the rules in order to tell them, night after night, to my eagerly waiting audience. Sometimes, caught up in the atmosphere of a tale, which would evolve as I went along, I forgot to watch for the dormitory monitor's foot. The punishment? You had to stand out. In other words, get out of your warm bed and stand bolt upright in the corridor, facing the wall, making sure under no circumstances you touched the wall, until the dormitory monitor felt you had paid sufficient penalty. This could range from 15 minutes, if he was feeling merciful, to 3 hours. Or if he fell asleep, even longer. Repeat offenders would be sent to the headmaster's stairs. This foreboding, carved structure was well away from the light and warmth of civilization. Not an attractive place to be sent halfway through a ghost story. One could only hope that the headmaster would not return and ascend the stairs while one was exiled there. The choir was based around a rigorous performance and practice schedule. Every weekday but one we had morning practice, after school practice and a church service to sing. Long choir practice on Saturday morning, service on Saturday afternoon. 3 services on Sunday. Although we only sang in religious services, it was all about performance and show. The choir master often reminded us, "You're here to perform for the people." To keep us up to par, he would sometimes single out mistake makers during practice time, hiss at them, pull their hair and shake their heads around. Each younger choir boy, or junior, would be assigned to an older choir boy, his senior, who he would stand next to during practice and service. The tradition was firmly embedded that if a junior made a mistake, senior would immediately kick him, just in case he hadn't noticed he'd gone wrong. Of course, the more powerful the kick, the better the lesson would be learnt, along with a valuable free lesson in self-control, since the kicks were often administered during a public service, and a yelp of pain emitting from the choir stalls would certainly have interrupted the congregation's enjoyment of the music. A further opportunity to develop a good level of stoicism was provided by the kneeler. At the appropriate juncture in the service, when all had to pray, we were required to fall to our knees on a long wooden kneeler, rather like a very low bench. The kneeler was on hinges, and as all fell to their knees, if your foot remained in a standing position a moment too long, it could get caught under one of the few legs of the kneeler. Immediately the weight of 10 boys came to bear on that poor foot. But again, no yelp of pain would be appreciated under the sober circumstances of prayer time. So it was best to grin and bear it. It would be misleading to characterize life at the school as an endless round of suffering. It wasn't. I felt secure with the routine of things so different to the instability of home. I enjoyed my academic adventures, finding it easy to do well in most subjects and being encouraged to dig deeper. Friendships afforded me a sense of mutual respect and admiration with my peers. And though I was by no means one of the best singers, really I was, and am, quite average, I began to develop a love for music. School gave me room to breathe. My swirl of memories include lessons with some phenomenal teachers, very enthusiastic about their subjects. Sunday afternoon expeditions to the woods where we were let loose and allowed to rampage. Tuck shop on Wednesday mornings, which was an improvised sweet shop set up in a corridor by a teacher, where we could spend a little of the pocket money our parents had left for us at the start of term, unless we'd been naughty, in which case we were banned. Endless games of football or British Bulldog in the schoolyard. TV nights where we'd watch the A-Team or Knight Rider. And various skirmishes with bullies. I was late for dinner one night, having taken on a bully and cracked his head open on a radiator. He never bothered me again. A slightly cold dinner was a small price to pay for such satisfaction. Then there was Christmas. All the non-choir boy boarders went home a week before. We in the choir had the school to ourselves for a week. We sang services every day, but there was no other work to speak of. The staff would arrange treats for us. Everything built up to the Christmas Eve night carol service, the highlight of the year, for which we began practicing months before. The cathedral would be packed with thousands of ticket-only visitors. All the gold and silver was on display. All possible pomp and ceremony was invoked. And of course the choir was the star of the show. It truly was a magical event to be part of. Looking back, you felt connected with something transcendent, something majestic and glorious. And the fact that you were needed to play an important role in it made it all the more glorious. And yet, one Christmas Eve, shortly before the carol service began, I sought out a part of the cathedral away from all the glitter and spotlights. I wanted to be in the quiet and in the dark. I sat down and fixed my eyes on the undecorated part of a wooden pew. I wanted nothing more than to be away from all the pomp and ceremony and gold and silver, to absorb with my eyes and my soul something simple, something plain, something unassuming, something real. 2 days later, having sung morning service on Boxing Day, we choir boys were allowed to go home. In spite of the fun and activity of boarding school, and despite the fact that it spared me much of the trouble of living at home, I was often homesick. I longed for family, however broken it was. I longed for the hugs and affection my mum would sometimes show me. Matron, the mother figure at school, was simply no substitute for the real thing, however flawed. I also longed for my stepdad to be a father to me. I was willing to overlook so many things in order for this to happen. Homecoming at Christmas was always a bittersweet experience. I was overjoyed to be back home, to be amongst my siblings. I'd felt special as the performer at the cathedral. Now I felt special as the child who'd returned from a world no one else in the family inhabited. My presents would await me, usually a second Christmas dinner as well. But it was never long before reality surfaced. The smallest infraction by one of us children would trigger verbal abuse and beatings that were both calculated and unbridled. Or, what would begin as a minor quarrel between my mum and the goat farmer would rapidly evolve into a full-blown and violent fight. Neither party was ever in the right. Insecurity was the permanent guest in our household. The one you think you've ushered away. The one you wish could be ushered away. Indeed, the one who sometimes seems to have packed his bags and gone. But there's always something that brings him back. At the age of 10, I recall sitting on the edge of my bed at home. From the depths of my heart, I made a decision. It's all up to me. I must take care of myself because no one else will. No one is really there for me. The cathedral music was, of course, very traditional and represented to me an established world of adults who had authority over me, who had the power to benefit or harm me, but who seemed inconsistent and so remained something of a mystery I could never really trust. Perhaps this was one reason I was drawn to the heavy, aggressive music of Iron Maiden. The screaming guitars, the yelled, unintelligible lyrics, the powerful driving rhythms, and the publicity images of these long-haired British rockers spoke of strength and stability, and bold non-conformity with established authority. I could control how much they did or didn't influence me, when I would or wouldn't listen to their music. Unlike the adults in my life who had authority over me whether I liked it or not. But there was something more. Their songs were laced with overt references to dark supernatural forces. This was what drew me. I felt attracted by supernatural powers that were unexplained. I spent a lot of time reading about mysteries such as the Bermuda Triangle or poltergeists. And while I retained the title of the best late-night ghost storyteller at school, I devoured dozens of ghost story books, always wanting to bring myself into a place of fear. I wanted to remain in control, and I could always close the books when I wanted to, but deep down, I also felt I needed to be in touch with something greater than me. Fear was something I could already relate to very well. So I was quite happy to take the doorway it provided into a sense of powers beyond myself. Powers unassociated with the authorities in my life, or so I thought. It's most significant that around this time, I secretly made a Ouija board at school with one sole purpose in mind. It was early evening when I convened a few of my friends, went into a small dark music practice cabin, and attempted to call up my dead father. Thankfully, nothing responded, at least not openly. I thought maybe it was because I used plastic cups instead of glasses or hadn't made the board quite right. Looking back, I know another hand was restraining those forces. At the time I was disappointed, and probably secretly relieved. During my childhood, we moved house 10 times. We lived in everything, ranging from picturesque farmhouses to small run-down council houses to a canal boat. Usually, it was either ambition or debt that would force a move. However, one of the moves was for different reasons, and ended up being the most significant of all. The transition from a small farm in one county to a small farm in another removed the journey of several hours between my school and my family. Our new home was to be in the tiny village of No Man's Land. It was aptly named, because as we pulled up late in the day in a couple of large removal lorries, it came to light that my mum and the goat farmer had not completed the purchase, and in fact did not have enough money to do so. Thus, we had nowhere to go, and nowhere to go back to. The owners of the house saw us 5 young children piling out of the vehicles, and their hearts were moved with compassion. They had every right to do nothing, to send us on our way, but they could not bear to see us homeless. So they agreed to allow our family to stay in the small granny annex at one end of the house, while my mum and the goat farmer got things sorted out. Sorting things out took some months, and they were months for the owners of tremendous inconvenience, and for us of appalling insecurity and violence. Yet, for the first time we began to see evidence of a greater hand at work, intervening. The fighting and arguments were extremely loud, easily heard by the kind owners in the other end of the house. One day the lady came bursting through the connecting door to intervene in a raging fight. She gave my mum and the goat farmer a piece of her mind and left. The shock on their faces was frozen there for a moment. Perhaps for the first time ever, someone had drawn a line. For the first time ever, we had a sense that we were not quite alone. Yet, the interventions seemed like only a glimpse, not bringing any lasting change. There's no way we could join the dots or see the unfolding picture. Perhaps this is one reason why, back at school after the move, I began consciously questioning my belief in God. If he did exist, clearly he was quite incapable of really helping people who need it. He might be able to give a hint here or there, but nothing substantial. Or he just didn't care. Out of some minor sense of duty, he might lift a finger here or there, but then he'd get back to what he'd really been wanting to do all along. I decided to begin abandoning the hypocritical, painfully weak religion I'd been brought up in, and instead believe in reincarnation. At least reincarnation makes sure everyone gets paid back for what they've done, whether good or bad. Then, one afternoon, sat in an empty classroom overlooking the cathedral green, I decided to stop believing in the first few chapters of Genesis about God creating the world. Honestly, I just didn't think such an indifferent, weak God deserved to get the credit for creation. I needed an alternative explanation, so although I didn't know many facts at all about the actual theories of evolution, I had a vague sense that it would do away with God, and that was good enough for me. I wanted to get away from authority, which I hated, feared, and viewed as being quite pathetic. I was to be in charge. I had to be, because no one was really there for me. In July that year, 1984, I returned home for the summer holidays. I was 12 years old. We were no longer in the granny annex. The owners had decided to sell the house to my mum and the goat farmer at a massive discount. Much to my surprise, my 2 elder sisters began talking to me about God. They'd been introduced to him, it seems, by the owners, who were Christians, before they left. I thought it was a bit odd, and I wasn't really interested. But I didn't really care what they or anyone else thought about God. God was irrelevant to me. But something began to get my attention. Things at home hadn't got any better. In fact, they'd got even more stressful, more violent. The owners no longer lived on site, so there was no restraining force present. But in the middle of it all, my sisters were different. There was no mistaking it. Up to this point, they'd seemed confused, frightened, angry, depressed, selfish. But now, they radiated a tremendous peace, joy, fun, strength, and above all a love, which I'd literally never seen before in anyone. I thought maybe they were going through a phase that wouldn't last, and I told them so. But as the weeks went by, I could see more and more that they had something solid, something, dare I say it, real. They began telling me that they'd met Jesus, that they'd been born again. They'd asked Jesus into their lives and he'd given them new life. That sounded strange to me, but I couldn't deny something significant had happened to them. They began speaking to me, explaining what the Bible teaches about God. I'd never, ever had the Bible explained to me in a way that made sense before. They told me that we've all sinned against God, breaking his laws. This sin has separated us from him and put us on a path to hell. But God loves us, so his son Jesus died on the cross to pay for our forgiveness. He wants to give us new life, eternal life, but we have to ask him in. When we do, we're born again. We become new people in him, rescued from hell, and on a path to a guaranteed heaven. The Bible verse that really jumped out to me was John 3, verse 3. Unless a man is born again, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. My sisters had asked Jesus in. They'd been born again, and that's why they were different now. Oh, from the first moment, I fought them every step of the way. Everything they would try to tell me, I would try to find a way to argue down. I was not about to start following some religion. I was quite proud of the arguments I came up with, but secretly, no matter how elaborate, ingenious, even boastful my arguments were, they felt weak compared to what my sisters were bringing to me. Deep down, I couldn't deny they were talking sense. And not just talking it, but living and experiencing it. But even as my arguments began to fail and I was being drawn to what they had, I fought and tried to push it away. Why? Because I didn't want to turn my life, my heart, over to anyone, especially some God, unless I absolutely knew that I could trust them. I'd learnt to protect myself and do it on my own. I'd learnt to be my own boss. Yet all this changed. I had no dreams, no visions, no supernatural visitations. Others may do, but I didn't. I was a 12-year-old whose eyes were already wide open to how ugly life can be, and also to some of its beauty. I knew that I was a victim, but I also knew, as my sisters explained, that we've all sinned, that what I'd suffered was not an excuse for my own breaking of God's laws, and I knew I'd broken them. I'd built up a long list. Before I went to boarding school, a younger boy used to come home with us after school to wait for his mum to finish work. Every afternoon, I would make him hang his coat up on the back of the door. He wasn't tall enough to reach the peg, so rather than help him, I would make him jump to try to hang it up, and he would have to stay there jumping, trying to reach the peg, until I decided enough was enough. I knew it was unkind, wrong, but I couldn't help wanting to make him suffer and the sense of power it gave me. Once, in an art class at school, I took some scissors and cut a lock of hair from my forehead. At home that evening, my mum asked me what had happened to my hair. I was scared that if I admitted it, I would be in for it. So I told her that my best friend had done it. She went to the school next day to complain to the head teacher. I said nothing. My friend got in real trouble. I never admitted the truth. I knew it was wrong, but I preferred my friend to be wrongly treated than me. My younger sister and I spent a whole summer holiday building up a pretend shop, full of empty cereal packets, cans, bottles. She particularly enjoyed playing with this. When the day came for me to return to boarding school, she had left for school in the morning. Before I left, I destroyed everything in the shop and left her an unkind note about it. I felt bad about it afterwards, but at the time I had enjoyed disillusioning her, disappointing her, making her sad. On one occasion, a school teacher had misjudged me on something, accusing me of not doing my piano practice when I should have. He wasn't very pleasant about it. Inside, I was enraged. I went back to my room and I wrote a note to self. It read, "Never, ever forgive Mr. X for what he did to you on," and there was the date. I was determined to harbour that unforgiveness. Otherwise, how would I have enough power to keep hating him and storing up revenge? As choir boys, we were all expected to get confirmed, a ceremony in the Church of England where you promise to follow God. We were given confirmation classes ahead of the ceremony. We were given a list of the 10 Commandments and told that God wanted us to obey them. I knew I'd broken many of them, so I began to try to follow them. Pretty soon I realized I can't do this. It's impossible. So, as my sisters now spoke with me, as I watched the depth and fullness of life that they now had with Jesus, I was in no doubt that I needed what they had. I needed change. I wanted change. There were things wrong in my own heart and life. I had sinned and needed forgiveness. I could have the same life, eternal life, that they had found in Jesus. The message of the gospel was clear to me, and I knew by this point that it was true. Like I said, no supernatural experiences came my way. Just a realization of the truth of what was being said, and what was being lived in front of me. That's how my Heavenly Father was intervening in my life. And so it was that one afternoon, in August 1984, I closed the door of my room and sat on my bed. I thought through what the Bible teaches and I weighed it up against my life. I made a calculated, cool, conscious decision to accept Jesus. I prayed for his forgiveness and asked him into my life. As simple as that. Nothing happened. Or at least nothing that I knew of. I felt no different. I got on with my day. 2 days later, I was chatting with my sister Jenny. I was telling her that since she had started talking to me about God, I hadn't felt such a strong love for wine. She looked at me in surprise and said excitedly, "Have you prayed? Have you said—" I breathed out a hurried "yes," which felt like a lie, because I couldn't remember my prayer of 2 days before. And I ran to the other end of the house, to the granny annex where we'd lived before. I got down on my knees and prayed, "Jesus, I've lived apart from you. Forgive me of my sins. Come into my life and let me live forever with you in heaven." Immediately, I knew it was done. As Jesus had said in the Bible, "Whoever comes to me, I will by no means cast out." I knew, as I got up from my knees, that I was forgiven, that he had come to live in me, that he would never leave, and that I was a new person. Looking back, that first prayer I'd prayed 2 days before marked my choice, my decision to open my heart to Jesus. With that second prayer, I was recognizing that it wasn't too good to be true. Jesus was for me too. I'd become a new person. Years before I even went to boarding school, I remember waking up one Christmas morning early, perhaps at 3 a.m. My stocking full of gifts was already at the foot of my bed. I was anxious to find out what I'd received, so I got out of bed, turned on the light, and opened it. I laid everything out on the floor and was enjoying looking at it. Then my stepdad came in. He was angry with me for opening the presents early. He gruffly told me to get back in bed, and he took all my presents and stocking away. I wasn't given them back for 8 days. When they were given back, the money that had been in the stocking and the snacks were gone. Even before that event, I'd got used to never playing with the door closed. If I was sat playing with my toy soldiers, I knew that at any moment my mum might call me to do a job. If I didn't hear her, there would be hell to pay. Often my playtime was interrupted by such requests. And so, I'd got used to the idea that you never know when what's good will be taken away from you, especially by people who are supposed to love you. But now I'd met Jesus, I began to find that his love is never taken away. The good things he does are here to stay. It wasn't too good to be true. Certain things about me changed dramatically and right away. Before, my language had been foul. I'd taken every opportunity I could to speak in the vilest, crudest ways. Now those words just weren't coming out of my mouth. I made no effort to change. God did it for me. On a deeper level, I'd stored up a lot of hatred inside. To one degree or another, I hated a number of people. I particularly hated the goat farmer. But now, although he'd not changed at all, I had. Where before there was hatred in me, now there was love. Not that mushy kind of sentiment that some people call love, that pretends everything's fine when it's not. No. This was a powerful, solid, courageous love. The love that seeks the best for the other person, even for your enemies, whatever it might cost you. I found myself loving my stepdad in this way now. I truly wanted the best for him, and indeed for everyone around me. I knew this love was real, especially when it was tested with very difficult ongoing situations. Other things about me didn't fully change right away. The anger I'd felt inside, for example, would sometimes still appear. Always when I was in situations that seemed impossible for me to deal with. Over time, God began to show me that the reason I got angry in those situations was because I felt alone. I'd got so used to being alone in the past, from the day my dad died right through to the day I became a Christian. Now I had to learn a new way of seeing things. I had to remember that I'm never alone because God is always with me. As I began to remember this, the anger disappeared. It had been plucked out from the root. God healed me of it. There's only one God, and He's in 3 persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The day I asked Jesus, the Son, into my life, He brought me into relationship with God the Father. This Father has been faithful to be with me, to guide me, to protect me, to teach me. As we were growing up, God the Father seemed distant, impotent, weak, uninterested. Now, having known Him for 30 years, I understand His ways a little better. Perhaps the greatest gift He's given us all as human beings is free will. We can choose how we live. He didn't take this free will away from my mum and the goat farmer. They used their free will to get what they wanted in life, at great cost to us children. It seems that God didn't intervene much with their choices, but all along He had a plan. My earthly dad was a musician, and I inherited his gift. This gift opened the door for me to attend boarding school. Thus we moved to be near the boarding school, and God used my mum and stepdad's irresponsibility and selfishness so that we would end up living alongside the owners of that house. They were Christians and introduced my sisters to Jesus. My sisters introduced me to him. And again, without any special visions or supernatural happenings, I recognized the truth of the message. It made sense to my mind. And I recognized its reality through the lives of my sisters. It made sense to my heart. No smoke, no dazzling lights, no voices from the sky. Just ordinary, everyday situations in the middle of a broken world, all along, being guided by his hand, inviting me into his world. And so I was found by my Father.